Hello, I'm Jonathan Novick, and I'm here to talk about native versus tropical milkweed facilitation of monarch butterfly OE parasite. And I'll go into what that means in just a minute. So, before I get started, I'd like to just sort of give an overview of what I'm going to talk about, starting with the monarch butterfly, Danaus plexippus, and I'm going to go through its migration, which is its famous migration, its life cycle, and how local populations and recent declines relate to the rest of this issue. Then I'm going to go into the OE parasite, Ophryocystis electroscura, and its life cycle and how it's dispersed. Then I'll go into the last and arguably most important piece of this study, the milkweeds, Asclepias speciosa, fascicularis, and curassavica. One of those is a tropical plant, and the other two are natives. And I'll go into the traits of those three, as well as how those three relate to the interaction between the other two species that I'm going to talk about. And then I'll go into a little bit, and I'll sort of summarize and talk about what my results have found so far. So, the monarch butterfly is famous for its yearly migration across North America to overwintering sites in Florida, Mexico, and California. Mostly Mexico, though. The entire migration goes across 3 to 4 generations of butterflies, which all share the 3,000 mile or 5,000 kilometer distance of the route on the eastern population. As you can see, sort of the western population, there are western populations, like the ones that overwinter in California, that don't have as much distance to go around. Now, I talked about generations, and so it's only fitting that we go into the life cycle. Monarch butterflies exclusively lay their eggs on milkweed plants, because the milkweed plant is toxic, and thus the monarch butterfly's eggs avoid predators that would otherwise be an issue. The larvae that hatch from the eggs then feed on the milkweed until pupation. Once pupation begins, the larvae search for a suitable substrate and then form their chrysalis. The emerged adult mates or enters sexual diapause to continue migration, if it's from one of the generations closer to the winter. Although there has been a recent decline, especially in the western monarch, although overall population decline has been noted as early as the 1950s. It's worsened over the years, and while there have been some upsides, as you can see in this graphic here, overall there have been little signs showing otherwise. It's also worth noting that the western population is considerably more affected by this decline than the eastern population, with potential factors being increasing drought severity, increasing prevalence of genetically modified crops and pesticide usage, habitat loss to urban environments, weather conditions, and also herbicide usage, etc., etc. And then one last factor, Ophryocystis electroscura. Now, this is a highly specialized protozoan obligate parasite that infects the monarch butterfly. They're contained in these spores, and they're not actually, from a biological perspective, spores, but they're called spores, or they're most often referred to as spores, that remain dormant until a monarch larva ingests it along with some milkweed. Now, then the digestive acids will break this outer coating, releasing 10 to 12 parasite individuals, which will then feed on the larva through the inside out. Then once the larva begins to pupate, parasites will start to mate, covering the emerged adult in spores, and heavily infected adults will not have flying ability and might not even survive to emerge, but more lightly infected individuals can be asymptomatic and continue spreading the spores. It's also worth noting that some of these issues play into one another, as survival to emergence is a lot more common in areas that are less affected by the drought. So there's some play between these factors. OE infection and these spores spread by when the individual parasites eat their way out of the larva, the larva, which is in chrysalis, they mate mainly where the emerging adult butterfly ovipositor will form. And an ovipositor is a placement device that many insects have that's used for placing and moving around eggs. And this ensures that the spores are close to the larva, which will hatch from said eggs when they're placed. Now, all of this is well and good, or not good as it were, but how does it relate to these milkweeds? Well, the issue, you see, is that one of these things is not like the others. The two native species, Asclepius fascicularis and Asclepius speciosa, are native to the North American Southwest and seasonally reduced to a root system, with their entire upper body, above ground body, dying off, and only the root system remaining to then regrow when the weather is warm again. Tropical milkweed is not native to North American Southwest, and is in fact native to South America, and is perennial, meaning that it has an above ground body all year long. It's also popular to plant amongst local gardeners who want to help the monarch butterfly and its decrease in population. But this might actually be causing an issue. Because the native plants reduce to a root system, they purge any uneaten OE spores, and those fall to the soil, where they then die. Theoretically, though, tropical milkweed's perennial nature, it causes it to accumulate more OE spores over years and years on the oldest leaf, which will then remain dormant until eaten. And this is the hypothesis that my experiment tested, with my methods being having a number of individual plants per species in gallon pots that I then monitored in terms of growth and parasite count at set points using an optical microscope and Scotch tape, which is actually how U tape, which is common practice with OE spores. In other studies, they take them. You'll see here they're on those are actually the scales of the butterfly that they're on. They take them off with tape and then put the orbs on a slide and look under the slide. I do the same thing, but applying that to the leaf of each of these plants. And so to summarize, you can see that local rehabilitation efforts in planting tropical milkweed that are meant to promote the recovery of the monarch butterfly may in fact be counterproductive, as the plant facilitates infection by the opposite parasite, more so than the local milkweeds. And this is what my data has shown thus far, albeit that's only a small group of data. However, you do see a fairly large number, you do see that there is a larger difference in general between the older leaves and the newer leaves of each of the seed plants, which are the Curasavica, rather than the two native species here shown in green and blue.